Welcome to the On the Blue Line podcast. I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and this is Morning Roll Call. It's exciting to be back with you again this week, and I'm so thankful that you listen time and time again, or watch, or however you have found us. This week, remembering a radio icon and those who influence our lives. The On the Blue Line podcast starts now. Remember, this week, this show, as with most shows, is brought to you by our friends at Campfire Blend, campfireblend.com, Campfire Blend Coffee. Be sure to check them out. Use code BLUELINE if you haven't tried them yet. If you have tried them yet, be sure to go to campfireblend.com and use the code BLUELINE for 10% off. So welcome to this week's show. You know, this week we lost a radio icon. From behind his golden EIB microphone, with talent on load from God. Yes, that was a joke, by the way, which we could tell from the dissenting voices this week that they may or may not have gotten that joke. Rush Limbaugh affected and had a profound effect on radio, specifically conservative radio, but really on radio, talk radio in general. You know, I recall growing up listening to Rush Limbaugh. My dad would listen to it in the car as I would ride with him here, there, and everywhere. And we would discuss different things that he would hear. My dad was a big fan of talk radio for years. In all honesty, I wasn't. Of course, I was a traditional teenager, and I loved music. I had no talent of it. I know if you watch the video, you probably see this guitar over here. But yeah, there's no natural talent when it comes to that. I love it. I try it. I do my best, but it's not my natural God-given gift. So I always loved listening to music, right? That was always what I liked to do. But my dad would listen to talk radio. As I got older, I would also listen to other things. I know back in those days, we had these things called cassette tapes. For a lot of you younger listeners, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but we would play cassette tapes of others, not just talk radio and so forth, but also guys like Zig Ziglar and some of the cassette tapes that they would put out on different topics. And I didn't realize just what an influence that these people had on me. You know, it was interesting when we lost Rush this last week. I kind of had a feeling like in my gut, like one that took me back to 1995, which was the last time I had that feeling. In 1995, I was young. That was a long time ago. I was much younger. A local DJ in the town that I grew up in, Jeff Carlson, had passed away. And I had grown up listening to his radio show. You're going to see the irony here, or see the pattern that as I see it, for why I do what I do now, because I've always, not idolized, but I've always enjoyed listening to people who had the ability to influence others with their voice through the art of telling stories. And that local DJ, Jeff Carlson, he was a funny guy. In fact, he was known for his laughter, for his infectious laughter, and for being pretty much a goofball. And for single-handedly saving and making that radio station quite popular. It was actually a Christian radio station in that town. And he had passed away in 1995 in a car wreck in December. And I distinctly remember it. It was really weird. In fact, I distinctly recall writing a piece of paper. I was going to try to find it, but we would have to go way, way, way back in the archives to find what I wrote back in 1995. But I had written something, pretty much a play on the night the music died, and it was the night the laughter died. Again, that's what he was known for. And those feelings and those thoughts, they kind of came back to me this last week with the passing of Rush. Just like with Rush Limbaugh, I didn't know either one of them. I didn't know Jeff Carlson. I didn't know Rush Limbaugh personally. I only knew them as you know them, and as many of you know others that you listen to. I only had the advantage and the ability to listen to their voice and to what they would tell and the influence that they would have on my life. You know, when I came into that's the beauty of this medium, this beauty of podcasting, is it allows us to come to you And in some ways, I can fulfill this dream and this desire that I grew up with for wanting to be able to speak and wanting to be able to tell stories and wanting to be able to help. I mean, I think in some ways the radio and podcasting, it's a teaching medium as much as it is an entertainment medium. It allows you to simplify concepts and to share others and share with others. And quite frankly, AM radio and talk radio would not probably exist had it not been for Rush Limbaugh, who's credited as pretty much single-handedly saving AM radio. Of course, I will point out that in the 90s, late 80s and early 90s, when I listened to a lot of AM radio, there was still music on AM radio. So a lot of the early and older in the 80s, country music that I listened to was all on the AM dial. But when it came to what talk radio became, a lot of it is credited to Rush Limbaugh and to what he did. You all probably saw, if you're on social media, anyone who listens to me knows that I pretty much hate social media, though it is a necessary evil, emphasis on the evil. But you probably noticed a lot of negative things said about him by people who either A, never listened to his show a day in their life, or had some other sort of misconception, not based in any form of reality or in any form of debate or in any form of conversation with the guy. And you could tell right away that they'd probably never, ever even listened to a single episode of his show. And yet people had all sorts of negative things to say. And it's really sad because when you talk about influence, I don't have to agree with somebody on everything. In fact, he probably wasn't my favorite. But if there had been no Rush Limbaugh, some of my favorites, such as Glenn Beck and Mark Levin and some of these other well-known influencers, if you would, using a modern term, but these talk radio guys that exist today wouldn't be able to do what they do had it not been for Rush Limbaugh blazing that trail for a lot of them. And it's no secret the influence that those guys have had on my life and for my desire to do this. In fact, those of you who know me personally know that a lot of my reason for even wanting to start this podcast and go down this road is that dream of someday working with a network like Blaze TV, one of the very few actual moderate news channels that are out there. But, what Glenn Beck has built is just amazing. And it's, again, I think that it's important to note that a lot of these guys wouldn't exist and wouldn't be able to do what they do if it hadn't been for guys like Rush Limbaugh. So I talk all this in remembrance or in memory of Rush. But as always, I want there to be a takeaway, right? I want there to be something that you get out of this, something that is actionable for you at the end of the show, which I try to do at every show. So I want to give you three thoughts along this line. First of all, know your influences. I remember when I was a kid, I know, again, we're going way back. There was always, when they talked about computers, it's GIGO, right? You've probably heard that statement before. Garbage in, garbage out. What you put into something is what you're going to get out of something. If you put in bad code, your computer is probably not going to do whatever you expected it to do, or that program is not going to do whatever you expected it to do. The same is true with us, right? If we are constantly putting garbage in and we are not moderating what we are getting and what we are taking in, it's going to negatively come out of us. I think we see that a lot in the negative side of social media these days, right? If people are getting a steady diet of that absolute garbage, which is primarily what social media has become, though there are some good ones out there, but if they're primarily getting that garbage out of there, then that becomes what they think about. It's what they consider. It's what comes out of them later. So I think it's important that we know our influences, know what we are taking in. What Rush Limbaugh's real talent was, what his ability was to take political concepts and to distill them down so that you and I, the common people, if you would, the people that make America truly great, understood these concepts. Because here's the thing, politics is not as complicated as those who are in the ruling class want you to think it is. I mean, these current modern day oligarchs that want to take these concepts and make them to where nobody believes they can even understand them, and hence they have to come out with edict after edict in order for you to protect you, the people, is not only dangerous, is not only anti-American, but it's not reality. The fact is these concepts can be understood by all of us, by the common man. Every one of us can understand the concepts of liberty, of true equality, of not equity, but equality. We can all understand these concepts. And it was people like Rush Limbaugh that were able to take these concepts and they were able to distill them down into a manner that we could understand them and that we could act upon them. And that even as a kid, you start to see the influence that that had. You know, the other thing that I find so interesting, and I kind of touched on a few minutes ago, is that when you think about these people like Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Mark Levin, Zig Ziglar, and others, I've never personally met any of them. And yet, in some ways, I credit a lot of things that not only that I do now, but also the thought processes that I have, I credit them with it. So the second point that I want you to think about this week is making the best use of windshield time. That concept is becoming a little bit more popular, but I've been fortunate, as many of you know, that before I worked in law enforcement, I put plants in the ground green side up. That's essentially all I did. Landscaping. But the advantage to landscaping, much like in law enforcement, is you do a lot of driving. You have to get to job sites all over the place, depending on your role. And the roles that I had were typically in more of a sales type role or a design type role. So you would drive all over the place. No matter what state I was in, no matter what role that I had at that business, you were driving all the time. And you literally can get a master's degree in whatever concept, whatever information that you want to learn by just simply listening to the radio. Nowadays, we have the advantage of podcast. In those days, I used to get books on tape quite a bit, and I would listen to them everywhere I go. And I've continued that practice even now. Because in law enforcement, if you're listening to this show and you're in law enforcement, you have hours and hours probably of windshield time. I mean, remember that law enforcement is hours of boredom with moments of terrifying excitement. So in those hours of boredom, when you're just simply driving around, you have the opportunity to listen to a topic that interests you. You know, you could listen to some of these names I've mentioned and literally get a master's degree in politics, if politics is what interests you. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's goal setting. That was a big one I would listen to some of Zig Ziglar's programs on, or his program Top Performance. But that's just a couple. Nowadays, we're blessed with so many different types, and they all can be easily just played on your phone. That is one of the amazing things about the times that we're living in, is you really no longer have an excuse. There's all sorts of programs. In fact, you could literally get types of certificates and so forth for different programs and all different topics of study. So one of the lessons, one of the takeaways is making the best use of what we call windshield time. And then lastly, and this is my final point this week, I want you to think about the influence that one voice can have. You know you're doing well when you have a bunch of people that hate you. And in his passing, there was a bunch of people, most of whose opinions do not matter to me and shouldn't matter to anybody, who did not like Rush Limbaugh and put out very mean, nasty things, primarily from the tolerant left, a term I'm using very, very loosely. But yeah, the tolerant left was extremely tolerant and very kind and loving. And anyway, so think about the influence that your voice can have. Think about how that multiplies. You know, it's that whole butterfly effect, right? That whole alleged thing where the butterfly flaps its wings in Africa and all of a sudden it can control storms on the other side of the globe. In some ways, though, that's the way the voice and the influence that each of us have. You never know what that's going to be. You talk to one person, you make a difference in one life, and that multiplies, and it grows, and it spreads, and to the next person, and the next person, and the next person. And you have no idea the influence that you might have. There could be someone listening to this show right now, somebody who's much more talented than I am. Lord knows that won't take a whole lot. And they can take something they heard here, some lesson, some offhand comment, something that I don't even know was that relevant. And yet it can make a huge difference to them. It can motivate them. It can change them and the difference that they can make in the lives of others. And that grows and it multiplies. And one person can literally change the world. I think that really is the takeaway this week. When we think about the life and the legacy of Rush Limbaugh and we think about what he did, again, probably not my favorite talk show host, though I have utmost respect for him. And I really think that he did amazing things, but his style didn't always resonate with me. But he paved the way for those whose style did resonate with me and made a huge difference in my life. And that's the thing, right? What can you do? What can I do today to make a difference in someone else's life that's going to multiply, that's going to grow, and you can make a difference in others' lives? If you're somebody listening to this and you're like, I can't stand that guy, blah, blah, blah. I would suggest, in fact, most of the stuff's archived. Go back and listen to a couple episodes because chances are you probably never have. And if you have, and you've given it an honest try and you're just like, you know what, it's just not my style. That's okay too. Yeah, we're not all going to resonate with everybody. But as long as we stick true to the common beliefs and to the common things we have with each of our fellow man, and we think about the influence that we have on the lives of others, then that's what's most important. And that's how we keep a legacy alive. And that is what America is all about. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Until we see you next week, I'll see you out there on the blue line.